Welcome back, everybody. We're diving into a really interesting book today. It's called The Power of Us by J. Van Bavel.
It's a fascinating look at social identity.
Yeah, you know how our sense of belonging shapes like literally everything, how we see the world, the choices we make. It's pretty wild.
And it all starts with a story about cheese.
Right. A near-death experience involving cheese. Who would have thought?
So the authors Jay and Dominic are at this academic event.
Fancy?
Yeah. And Dominic starts chicken on a piece of cheese.
Oh, no.
And Jay, swoops in and saves some Heimlich maneuver the whole bit.
That's a pretty dramatic way to start a book about human connection.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, but it kind of gets at the core idea. We're social creatures at our core, even when things get a little intense.
Okay, so let's break down this whole social identity thing.
Yeah.
What does it actually mean? Like, how would you explain it?
What's the groups we belong to, right? Our families, our communities, even our favorite sports teams, they kind of become part of our sense of self.
So it's not just like the groups we're objectively in, but like how we feel about them and how they make us who we are.
Exactly. It shapes how we see the world, how we make decisions, everything.
Okay, I'm starting to see it. Like, think about it this way. You're on a plane full of strangers, right? You're just individuals.
Yeah, just a bunch of people.
But then you hit some crazy turbulence, and suddenly everyone's looking at each other, holding their breath.
You're all in it together.
Right. Like that shared experience, even if it's just for a few minutes, it creates this feeling of like we're all in this together. We're a group now.
That's social identity in action.
It's kind of amazing how quickly those group identities can like form and shift, right?
Mm.
It makes me think of this story from the book about this town in Germany.
The town of Bentnix.
Yeah. And they were totally divided by shoes.
It sounds crazy, but it's true. The Dassler brothers, the founders of Adidas and Puma,
Oh, yeah.
they had this huge rivalry, and it split the whole town into two camps.
Based on what sneakers they wore?
Yep, Adidas versus Puma. It was a whole thing.
Wow. So something as simple as a shoe preference can become like a defining characteristic of your identity.
It shows how even really trivial things can become these symbols of belonging and create these strong group identities.
Makes you think, what are some of the things we do today that might seem probably random to outsiders, but actually mean a lot to us?
Right. Like, what are our modern day shoe rivalries?
Exactly. And the book goes on to say that these group identities don't just shape how we feel, they actually change how we see the world.
Oh, absolutely. They talk about this classic study where they showed students from Princeton and Dartmouth footage of a football game between their schools.
Oh, this is going to be good.
The game was rough, lots of penalties on both sides, but each group of students, they overwhelmingly saw the other team as the bad guys.
They were blinded by their team loyalty.
Totally. Even though they were watching the same footage, their interpretations were completely different.
So even when we're looking at the exact same information, our group identities can make us see things totally differently.
It's like we're wearing these invisible glasses that distort our perception.
And that's where this idea of naive realism comes in, right?
Yeah. We all tend to believe that we're seeing the world objectively, and anyone who disagrees with us is just biased.
But the truth is, we're all susceptible to it.
Every single one of us.
It's kind of unsettling to think about how much we might be missing because of these filters.
It's definitely something to be aware of. And it goes beyond just what we notice.
Hmm.
Our identities even shape our tastes and beliefs.
Wait, so you're saying my love of spicy food could be because of my cultural background, not just my taste buds?
It's totally possible. The book actually talks about a study inspired by My Cousin Vinny.
That movie's a classic.
So in the movie, there's this whole thing about grits, right?
Yeah.
And researchers were curious, so they did a study and found that Southerners actually craved grits more when they were thinking about their Southern identity.
So it wasn't just about the taste, it was about what grits represented.
Exactly. It was about their sense of belonging.
Okay, that is so cool. But how does this play out in like the real world? I mean, does this mean our political beliefs could be influenced by our social identities too?
Oh, absolutely. The book talks about how politicians often use this to their advantage.
Like how?
They use language and imagery that appeals to specific groups. They highlight shared values and even make it seem like other groups are a threat.
So they're activating those in-group, out-group dynamics we talked about.
Exactly. Like, think about Donald Trump's Build the Wall campaign.
Okay.
By focusing on immigration as a threat to American identity, he tapped into a lot of people's anxieties.
So it wasn't just about the policy itself. It was about the deeper emotional stuff it triggered.
Exactly. And this isn't just limited to politics. We see this everywhere. Sports rivalries, debates about climate change, you name it.
It makes me wonder, do we even have a shared reality if our perceptions are so different?
That's the big question, right? It's not that we're living in completely separate realities, but our social identities are definitely acting like filters.
So how do we break through those filters? How do we find common ground when it feels like everyone's so divided?
Well, the book offers some interesting strategies. One key idea is the power of dissent.
Dissent, like disagreeing with the group.
Yeah, it might seem counterintuitive, but having people who challenge the group's assumptions can actually lead to better decisions
Really?
and more creative solutions.
But doesn't dissent often lead to conflict? Like, if I'm always disagreeing with my group, won't that cause problems?
It's a balancing act for sure. And the book talks about different types of dissent, like strategic dissent, where you're directly challenging the group's goals. That can be harmful.
But if you're disagreeing about how to best achieve those goals, that can be a good thing.
Exactly. It's about picking your battles and making sure your dissent is constructive.
So it's not just about speaking up, it's also about being open to hearing dissenting voices.
Absolutely. And that's where good leadership comes in.
So what does effective leadership look like in the context of all this social identity stuff? How can leaders use this knowledge to unite people instead of dividing them?
That's a great question, and it's something we're going to dive into in the next part of our deep dive.
Can't wait. I'm already seeing the world differently after just this first part of our conversation.
That's the power of social psychology. It helps us understand the hidden forces shaping our behavior.
It's like you've given us a new pair of glasses to see the world through.
And the best part is we can use this knowledge to actually make the world a better place.
Okay, I'm officially hooked.
Hmm.
Let's take a quick break and then we'll come back to unpack even more of these mind-blowing ideas from the power of us. Okay, so we've been talking about how our social identities shape how we see the world. But how do we actually use this knowledge to make the world a better place?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
I mean, the book talks about some pretty big challenges, like economic inequality, climate change, even the future of democracy itself.
Uh-huh.
Where do we even start?
It can feel overwhelming for sure. But the cool thing is understanding social identity can actually give us tools to tackle these problems in new ways.
Okay, I'm listening.
Like take economic inequality, for example. One of the things that makes it so hard to fix is that people who have more status, they often feel threatened by the idea of sharing the wealth.
It's like they're scared of losing their status, even if it means others are struggling.
Right, so maybe instead of just focusing on the economic arguments, we need to think about the psychology involved. How can we reframe the conversation to appeal to people's sense of fairness and shared humanity?
So it's not about us versus them, it's about finding common ground where everyone benefits.
Exactly. And we see this with climate change, too. It's not just about presenting the scientific facts. It's about understanding how people's political identities shape their beliefs.
So someone who strongly identifies with a group that's skeptical of climate change might just ignore the evidence, even if it's right there in front of them.
It's a tough one. But that's why it's so important to find ways to bridge those divides. Can we appeal to shared values, like protecting our kids' future?
Yeah, could we highlight stories of people from different backgrounds who are already taking action?
Exactly. It's about connecting on an emotional level, not just a rational one.
It reminds me of that thing, the overview effect. Have you heard of that?
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that what astronauts experience when they see Earth from space?
Yeah, they talk about this like profound shift in perspective, this feeling of awe and interconnectedness that goes beyond national boundaries or even earthly
It's
concerns.
like suddenly see the planet as this one fragile thing that we all share.
Exactly. And even though we can't all go to space, the book suggests that cultivating that sense of shared humanity, that we're all in this together feeling, is crucial for dealing with these global challenges.
Okay, so we've talked about economic inequality and climate change. What about democracy? How does social identity fit into all of that?
This is where things get really interesting. The book argues that one of the biggest threats to democracy is polarization.
Polarization.
Yeah, the tendency to see our political opponents not just as people with different views, but as like enemies who are dangerous.
So it's that us versus them thing again, but on a much bigger scale.
Exactly. And when we start demonizing the other side, we lose the ability to have productive conversations, to find common ground, to work together to solve problems.
But how do we stop that? It feels like polarization is everywhere, especially online.
It's a real challenge. But the book does offer some hope. It suggests that we need to strengthen our shared identity as citizens, even as we acknowledge our political differences.
So like reminding ourselves that we're all on the same team, even if we're rooting for different players.
Perfect analogy. And it's not just about talk, it's about creating opportunities for people from different political backgrounds to interact in meaningful ways.
Like those programs that bring people together for dialogues across the political divide.
Yeah. The research shows that even brief encounters like online chats between people from different parties can increase empathy and understanding.
So it's about humanizing the other side, breaking down those stereotypes.
Exactly. But it's tough when so much of the information we get online just reinforces those divisions.
So true. How do we combat that?
Media literacy is key. Being able to critically evaluate the information we're consuming and understanding how algorithms and filter bubbles can shape our perceptions.
So being proactive, seeking out diverse viewpoints, not just accepting whatever pops up on our screen.
Exactly. And being willing to challenge our own assumptions, asking ourselves, why do I believe this? Where is this information coming from? Am I getting the whole picture?
Okay, that's a lot to digest,
Yeah.
but I'm honestly feeling more empowered, like I have more control over how I engage with the world now.
That's what's so cool about social psychology. It doesn't just explain things, it gives us tools to change them.
So looking back at everything we've talked about, what are some of the big takeaways that stand out to you?
For me, it's realizing that our social identities are much more fluid than we think. We're not stuck in these rigid boxes.
Like those folks in Germany divided by shoes?
Right. And it makes you realize how powerful leadership can be. Leaders can either exploit those divisions or they can use their influence to build bridges and create a more inclusive society.
Like Mandela using the Rugby World Cup to unite South Africa after apartheid.
Or
Or Obama letting that kid touch his hair.
such powerful moments. It reminds us that leadership isn't just about holding a position, it's about understanding people's deeper needs and using that understanding to make a positive impact.
So it's about storytelling, but with real-world consequences.
Exactly. Leaders are shaping narratives about who we are, what we value, what kind of future we want.
And we're not just passive listeners. We have a choice in which stories we embrace, which groups we align with, what kind of world we want to create.
Exactly. We have agency. We're not just products of our environment, we're active participants in shaping it.
That is so inspiring. But I know you always like to leave our listeners with something to ponder. So what's your parting thought for today?
Given everything we've talked about the power of social identity, the challenges we face, and the potential for positive change, I'd ask you this. How can you use this knowledge to make a difference in your own life?
Ooh, that's a good one. It's like taking all this heady stuff and turning it into a personal call to action.
Exactly. How can you be more mindful of your own social identities and how they might be shaping your perceptions and your choices? How can you use this knowledge to build bridges and create a more inclusive world?
Okay, I'm ready to put this into practice. Let's take another quick break and then we'll come back to wrap things up and talk about some key takeaways from the power of us. It really makes you think, like all these ways our identities are shaping our lives even when we don't realize it.
It's like a whole new layer of understanding human behavior.
It's like you've given us this secret decoder ring.
And the best part is, we can use this knowledge to make a real difference.
Okay, so where do we go from here? What can our listeners actually do to put these ideas into practice?
Well, I think the first step is just becoming more aware of your own social identities. What groups do you belong to? How do those groups shape your values, your beliefs, even how you see the world?
And how those identities might be influencing how you interact with people from different groups.
Exactly. Once you start to see those patterns, you can start to challenge them.
Hmm.
Are you making assumptions about someone based on their group membership? Are you dismissing their opinions without really listening?
It's about checking our biases right, being open to different perspectives.
Absolutely. And it's not just about individual awareness, it's about building more inclusive environments. Think about your workplace, your community, even your family. How can you create a sense of belonging for everyone?
So creating spaces where everyone feels valued and respected, where they can truly be themselves.
Exactly. And that's where leadership comes in. Leaders have this incredible opportunity to shape the culture of their organizations and communities.
They can either make those divisions worse, or they can bring people together.
It all goes back to those narratives we talked about. What stories are we telling ourselves and each other about who we are and what we stand for? Are we focusing on what unites us or what divides us?
It's a good reminder that we all have a part to play in shaping those stories. We're not just passive bystanders. We can challenge those narratives, rewrite them, create new ones that are more inclusive and more inspiring.
And we don't have to do it alone. We can find strength in connecting with others who share our values.
It's about building coalitions, finding common ground, and working together to create the kind of world we want to see. It's about turning these insights about social identity into action.
And that's what makes this book so powerful. It's not just about understanding the world as it is, it's about creating a better future.
I'm feeling pretty fired up after this deep dive. It's definitely giving me a whole new perspective on the power of social identity and how we can use it to make a difference.
I'm so glad to hear that. And remember, it all starts with awareness. Once you see these patterns, you can't unsee them. And then it's up to you to decide how you're going to use that knowledge to make a positive impact.
Such a great point. Well, that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive. But I want to encourage all our listeners to check out The Power of Us for themselves. It's a fascinating read, and it might just change the way you see the world.
And who knows, you might even be inspired to go out and change the world yourself.
That's it for today's show. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.